In this video I'm going to demonstrate the basic mechanics of producing pivot tables in Microsoft Excel. And as you will see, once you learn the basic mechanics, the best way to develop your further skills is simply by experimenting and seeing what you get as you try different alternatives. So we'll be using the same ElectMart sales data that the book uses in its demonstration. This way you'll have a couple different examples with the same data set. The data represents a number of different records, and each record is observations of one particular customer order on an online sales site. So we've got the day on which the sale occurred, the day of the week the sale occurred, the time of day, the region of the country, which type of credit card they use, the gender of the buyer, and so on. So we recorded this data sale by sale, and we have 400 observations as we look through all the data. Just so we understand exactly what we're seeing when we get into the pivot tables, I'm going to go ahead and compute some summary statistics for the total cost variable. This is the one we'll focus our attention on in this example. The total cost is the total amount the customer spent on their order. Notice we also have the number of items ordered, the total amount they spent, and the cost of the highest priced item they bought. But looking at that total cost data, I'm going to go in and compute the sum of all of the 400 values, and so the total amount spent by all the customers was this $61,527.21. I'm also going to compute the average of those values. So the average amount spent per purchase was $153.82, and I'm also going to count the values, and we have 400 records. Each record has an observation of total cost, so there are 400 observations of total cost in this data set. Now, to create my pivot table, I'm going to put my cursor anywhere inside this body of data, and I'm going to, on my Excel menu, choose Insert, Pivot Table. And you'll see, first of all, that Excel has recognized this is a continuous range of observations, so it's recognizing the entire block as my data table. I'm going to choose the default New Worksheet location for my pivot table, and I'll click OK. Right. And this is what we see now when we're starting a pivot table. Right. This menu, Pivot Table Field List, has a list of all the fields in the data set that we selected when we first created the pivot table. And it's getting these labels from the top row, which is the label for each column. Now, the value that we're going to try to analyze is that total cost. So I'm going to use my mouse and take the total cost field and drag it into this values field in the pivot table field list. And what you see here, so far that's nothing real dramatic, is that we have a pivot table and it's telling us the sum of the total cost variable is that same 61,527.21 that we calculated earlier. So as of yet the pivot table hasn't done anything real fabulous, but now I am going to take the field day and I'm going to drag it into the row labels. And as you can see here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. As you can see here, right, now we're seeing where that 61,527.21 comes from when it's broken out by how much of that was on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and so on. Okay. Now I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I'm going to drop this arrow down, and under More Sort Options, I am going to select Manual, and what this allows me to do is drag these values. I've got Sunday, Monday, I want to take Tuesday and drag it up here. Wednesday, I'm going to take Thursday. So now my days go Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday in the right order. But what the pivot table has done then is gone through the entire data set, found all the values, all the fields where the day is Sunday, added those total cost values up, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Okay. Now I am going to drag another field, region, also into the row labels, and you see the effect on the pivot table. Now I have broken out by day, and within each day broken out by region. If I go back into my row labels and rearrange these fields, now it's day sorted by region. If I drag region to the top, again you see the impact on the pivot table. Now my table is broken out by region first, Midwest, Northeast, South, and West, and within each one of those I've got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So I can break my data out. In each case, the values I'm looking at are the field that I have in the values field of this menu. But I can choose different ways to break out and see the different values of total cost. For example, now I'm going to take the region field and drag it out of the row labels box and into the column labels box. And now you can see the effect on my pivot table. I've got a row for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I also have a row for a column for Midwest, Northeast, South, West, grand total, and so on. Okay, so again, we've got the grand total of the 61,527.21. Of that grand total, 450.9 came from Sunday sales on the Midwest. 649.74 came from Monday sales in the Midwest. The grand total Sunday sales was this 4,777.03. The grand total Midwest sales was this 96.18.27. Right? So you see the effect of having row labels, you see the effect of having column labels. Now I'm going to take this field gender and I'm going to drag it into the report filter. Right? And what happens now is, because I have a report filter called gender, it uses my gender field, which has values male and female, and I can select my table to report all genders, or I can change it to report only for the males, or I can change it to report only for the females. I'll go back and do it for all genders. Okay. Notice whenever I click my mouse outside the pivot table, I lose that menu on the right side of the screen. Whenever I click inside the pivot table, that menu comes back again. Now maybe I want to see male and female at the same time. So what I will do then is I will take my gender field, drag it out of the report filter and into the row labels. And now you see my results for Sunday, female, male, Monday, female, male, and so on. So you can have more than one row label. You can also have more than one column label. Personally, I find that tables become hard to read when you have more than one column label. If I'm going to have more than one, I typically try to make it be the row label rather than the column label. But that is the basic of how you create pivot tables in Excel. We drag a field, or we can drag actually more than one field, into the values, and that's what's going to be reported. Then we can choose different ways to report it by dragging alternative categorical fields into either the row labels or the column labels or the overall report filter.